For this presentation, I'm really pleased to introduce two members of the team from the World Resources Institute, or WRI, who have led the development of the Just Transitions Monitoring Guide. So firstly, Neelam Singh, who's a Senior Associate of the Global Climate Program, and Chelsea Gomez, who is the Climate Transparency Project Manager. So over to you, Neelam and Chelsea.
Thank you so much, Hannah, and thank you, Henning, for those wonderful introductions. As Hannah said, my name is Chelsea Gomez. I'm with the World Resources Institute. Sorry. I'm an author on the ICAT Just Transitions Tracking Guide. And today I'm going to walk you through some of the understanding behind the guide, as well as the methodology that's presented in the ICAT Just Transitions Monitoring Guide, so that you can learn how to better apply the guide in your own context. Next slide, please. So we'll begin our presentation today by walking you through what exactly is the ICAT Just Transitions Monitoring Guide, describing who should use it and what the benefits are, and finally we'll dive into the recommended steps from the guide. So the ICAT Just Transitions Monitoring Guide was developed by the World Resources Institute and the Initiative for Climate Action Transparency. The guide provides a methodology to support the development of a monitoring framework that will enable governments to track the status of a just transition that's defined by stakeholders. Similar to a national greenhouse gas inventory, a just transition monitoring system is a useful tool for monitoring changes in relevant indicators, but alone cannot explain what is causing them. The guide is not a policy assessment tool meant to attribute impacts to specific policies, but rather a methodology for defining and monitoring the state of a just transition in order to inform policy and practice. The guide provides guidance to monitor and analyze social, economic, and environmental changes that may occur as countries implement policies to transition to a low-carbon, climate-resilient economy. The guide provides a step-by-step approach to support the development of a monitoring framework that enables governments to track the status of a just transition and employs a distributive, procedural, and restorative justice lens to understand how these changes may be impacting different groups. So the guide was designed for government agencies and ministries, such as those responsible for development, climate planning, data management, and finance. This includes national, subnational, regional, or local jurisdictions. However, the recommendations and considerations put forward by the guide can be used by non-governmental organizations, community service organizations, or financial institutions to support government-led tracking efforts or to better engage with the just transition monitoring process. So there are numerous benefits to monitoring just transitions. The first is that it can increase accountability and transparency in climate action by transparently sharing information on decision-making processes, goals, strategies, and impacts. And this can allow stakeholders to hold decision makers accountable for their stated commitments. The second is to inform just transition and development policies. So monitoring just transition indicators can therefore inform decision-making, enhance policy coherence, and contribute to the design of future policies. Gathering data on relevant indicators can help establish credible baselines, capture trends, and provide insights on the direction of change across selected areas of interest. Just transition considerations have become more prevalent within international and national climate policy planning. They're also increasingly being included in NDCs and LT-LEDs. So consistently monitoring these changes in socioeconomic environmental indicators can therefore facilitate policy modifications. The third benefit is to facilitate access to climate finance. So by tracking just transition related indicators, countries can monitor and document their progress towards outcomes that may have been agreed upon as part of funding from domestic or international sources, such as in the case of South Africa and Indonesia's Just Energy Transition Partnership plans. So tracking can demonstrate readiness and also demonstrate a commitment towards an inclusive and equitable transition to potential investors and partners. So this next portion of our presentation will walk you through the following recommended steps. We'll begin with step 1, developing just transition related goals and priorities. Step 2, formulating targets and key social and economic indicators. Step 3, establishing data coordination and collection processes. Step 4, analyzing data. And lastly, communicating and reporting results to reflect these changes and inform policies and decisions. So step 1, as I just mentioned, will be developing goals and priorities. So developing goals and priorities, it can be just transition goals, right, can be thought of as high-level statements that indicate desired outcomes across social, economic, and environmental dimensions. They can also articulate long-term, justice-oriented, and inclusive change that should accompany the transition to address climate change. So just transition goals, they can be thought of as process-oriented or outcome-oriented, but they should describe how communities interpret their future in terms of their people and their place in society. A good test, could you click one forward? Thank you. A good test of whether a goal is a just transition goal versus a climate or any other type of goal is to check to see whether it's actually addressing one of the 3 justices, which is distributive, procedural, or restorative justice. Next slide, please. So just transition goals versus just transition priorities. So distinct from goals, priorities will represent key impact areas that should be monitored during the transition to a low carbon, climate resilient economy. So users can define their just transition priorities based on impact assessment studies, and this can be done in collaboration with stakeholders. It's important to note, though, that since impact analyses focus only on the potential negative impacts of the transition, that users are encouraged to seek additional input and engagement with stakeholders to also monitor how benefits and opportunities are being shared. So priority areas, they may include jobs in the fossil fuel sector, the availability of finance in vulnerable communities, or access to clean renewable energy. In comparison, a possible goal related to the jobs priority may be to provide support for workers who are laid off from the coal industry or related businesses to secure good quality new jobs with family sustaining incomes. Or another example would be by 2030, a country's energy sector will have net positive employment in a range of zero carbon industries. Can you click forward one? So it's important to remember that not all impacts should be considered priorities. Instead, impacts with a high likelihood of affecting communities or having a significant magnitude should then be identified as priorities. Next slide. So the key steps that are put forward in this first chapter step of the guide is to begin with preparing an inclusive process. So as I had mentioned, right, through the goals and priorities, these need to be defined with stakeholders. And so this can ensure procedural justice in the process by making sure that stakeholders are having a say in their future. A just transition should not be considered just unless we have that element. The second step would be to identify impacts. So goals or priorities, they should be informed by knowledge of current and future impacts in vulnerable communities to support distributive and restorative justice. Developing goals, it can require significant political buy-in. And this may be challenging for some governments or some users of the guide who are working in jurisdictions that are in the very early stages of just transitions and are just beginning with those public dialogues, and where the government may not adopted any kind of specific vision statement or overarching objectives for the just transition. And in those cases, users of the guide, they may consider identifying priorities based on an understanding of the impacts of the transition. The third step is to develop priorities or goals. So broadly, priorities focus on the key impacts or areas of concern for monitoring. And goals, process goals can ensure decision-making is fair, and outcome goals can prevent negative impacts and address social, economic, and environmental injustices. For the purposes of this guide, goals and priorities, they exist on a continuum of specificity. So users identifying priorities, they can choose to advance along this progression to eventually define goals if that fits their context. So whether users continue, can you go back, please? Sorry. So whether users choose to develop goals or set priorities, again, they should decide this approach either before engaging with stakeholders or in consultation with stakeholders. And this just ensures consistency throughout the process, avoids confusion, and ensures that the stakeholder input is tailored and practical. The last step, of course, is to validate these goals and priorities with stakeholders. This is in line with an inclusive process that was identified in the first step. And so it also just helps to ensure procedural justice. Okay, next slide. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Neelam Singh to walk you through the next set of steps in the guide. Thanks.
Thank you, Chelsea, and welcome everyone from my side as well. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. So I will walk us through the remaining steps that Chelsea had highlighted in one of her previous slides, and now we come to look targets. So as you may have noticed, the monitoring steps are pretty similar to any kind of monitoring that one may undertake, emissions monitoring or any other kind of monitoring. The difference here really is in details as to how to apply those bigger, broader monitoring steps to just transition, a discussion of just transition in particular. Next slide, please. So in our context, targets provide benchmarks to monitor progress, to understand how the transition is unfolding. And clearly articulated goals are really important here because they can help inform the targets and subsequently the indicators. Since we are talking just transition, these targets obviously refer to formulated targets which are in line with the stated goals or priorities. And essentially, they bring further detail and nuance into the picture and point to specific change that may be of interest to the users, to the governments applying the guide. So for instance, your goal may have been around, say, promoting gender equality as your clean energy sector transitions. You could when it comes to formulating related targets, you could include more specificity by introducing, for instance, the percentage increase in the number of SMEs, small, medium enterprises that you want to see within the clean energy sector, or you can include percentage of women-owned businesses that are also small and medium enterprises, or it could be a target that is specific to promoting economic diversification in a coal-dependent region and attaching some benchmarks to that particular target. So you're essentially bringing more specificity to the goals and or the priorities and thinking about how many jobs are being targeted and by when, what kind of specific social protection measures are being planned and by when. So that's the function of the targets. Next, please. So targets are definitely recommended, but we also realize that countries and users may be at different points in terms of implementing this guide and approaching the guide. So there is flexibility within the guide in several of the steps, and in this case, users can choose to set them over time based on data and resources, and they can, if they choose to set these targets later in their journey in monitoring just transition, they can start with monitoring the indicators, and then subsequently, as more data gets collected, there's more confidence in setting benchmarks associated with the targets, and key indicators are emerging that they want to monitor progress towards those benchmarks. They can then subsequently develop the targets. Next, please. Users could have multiple targets contributing to a single goal in general, but in the real world, capacity is a constraint, resource is a constraint. So at least aim for one target per goal so that you are able to have some benchmarks to determine how you're faring against the goal. But the number of targets really very much depends on the capacity and resources, and it's really a progression. As time passes, you can add more targets or just begin with indicators. So essentially, the guide provides that flexibility for countries to come and embrace it at a point that where they are in terms of their capacity. Next one, please. Both Henning and Chelsea mentioned sustainable development impact assessments, which can also be used to inform targets as they can be used to inform goals, because they are they're pointing to potential impacts around which these targets can be designed. So for instance, to mitigate impacts related to employment, related to health, related to gender equity, etc. Targets can be short-term as well as mid to long-term. So just best practice around targets design in general says that it's helpful to not just create shorter-term targets, but also mid or longer-term targets and have that trajectory in front of you that this is how we move from shorter to mid to long term, and this is the path that we want to take in the longer run. Next, please. So for indicators, once your targets have been set, or if you are, for whatever reason, putting a pause on the step to develop targets, you can start developing your indicators. Indicators help to monitor progress towards your targets if they exist or towards the broader goals. but they are being defined in the context of this particular guidance around just transition. They are being defined to help track changes related to economic, social, and environmental aspects, but with a justice lens. So in that sense, it's different than say the guidance in the Sustainable Development Impact Assessment Guide, for those of you who are familiar with it, that because we are talking about just transition monitoring here, it very consciously brings in this layer of justice, this lens of justice to everything that is being discussed. So as transition policies are being implemented, these indicators are designed in a way that they help you understand how these policies are or are affecting or are being experienced by communities or households or workers and various economic regions. Next one, please. It is important to note that indicators, as was mentioned earlier too, that they only help monitor the change. If you're looking to establish a cause and effect relationship that is trying to understand what's causing this change, then we recommend that you utilize the guidance that has been provided in other similar guides in the ICAT's toolbox, such as the Sustainable Development Guide that was noted. Next one, please. So change, and this is because changes in indicator value are often influenced by a range of factors. The policy is just one of the factors, and the guide is not, when you're just monitoring the change, you're not really looking at what is underlying that change. Next one, please. So users should really include a combination of indicators pertaining to monitoring economic, social, and environmental changes. Next one, please. And indicators really should be selected so that they are helping one assess the movement towards the targets or goals. So for instance, these could be, next one, please. These could be indicators related to broad changes along social, economic, and environmental dimensions. As you can see in these examples, if you click next, please. So these could be related to employment, related to area of land reforested, related to populations covered under social protection programs. So those broad outcome-oriented changes, which speak to the outcome goals that Chelsea was referring to. Next one, please. Or these could also help monitor underlying enabling indicators that pertain to things like, next one, investments or number of support programs or partnerships that are being signed or being put in place. So these are, as the name suggests, enabling indicators. They potentially contribute to the more outcome-oriented changes in employment, in population coverage by programs, etc. So the two sort of go hand in hand. These provide some early sort of signals of the change that is occurring, and thereby, by the same measure, can also help identify where there may be some challenges and where things may be lacking, and tackling those could help achieve the broader outcome-oriented indicators. These indicators should also be disaggregated by, say, regions, because we are talking about different kinds of justices. So by regions, next one, please, could be if you disaggregate these by regions, such as urban versus rural, or by groups of people, such as by gender or by income, you're getting to the distributive aspect of this justice. And if you look at these changes in terms of how they are, what is the process behind them, how inclusive the transition process is, you are speaking to the procedural justice of part of it. And you can also look at the restorative justice part of it by considering how the transition policies may be designed to prevent future harm or to redress harm that may have already been done, especially with respect to vulnerable communities or groups. So what the guide provides is this matrix of environmental, economic, social, indicators overlaid with these justice dimensions, so that you're not just looking at the changes in those dimensions, but also thinking through how they are being experienced by different groups, and which is where the justice component and not leaving anyone behind component comes in. Next one, please. I will now move to the data collection part of it, and keeping the time in mind, we'll sort of run through it more quickly. Next one. So, I mean, GHG emissions monitoring, which perhaps more people are familiar with in general in the climate space itself, can be quite challenging and tedious. And given the number of indicators and the number of dimensions, the justice aspect, the socioeconomic environmental aspect that's included here, this can be even more challenging and tedious process. But what I wanted to emphasize with data collection is that it is important to view this entire exercise as an ongoing process that will continue to improve, will become better over time as experience is gained, as resources become available, as capacity is put in place. So we would urge users to not approach it with this aim to have like a complete perfect system from the very beginning, or to feel like overwhelmed by the number of indicators that may need to be monitored, but to think about what are some of the existing indicators that exist, the accompanying data collection methods that exist, any coordination processes and data sharing processes that already may be in place in the country, especially around, say, the sustainable development goals. A lot of countries are already collecting information around socioeconomic indicators, but it's all housed in different places. So building upon all that information is more important and can make the process more streamlined as well as a little bit more accessible. Next one, please. With the data collected, the next step is to then make sense of this data. And here again, it's a question of capacity and resources, but you can attempt different kinds of analyses, ranging from just a trend analysis to determining baselines, which can then be used to inform the indicators, the targets that, or revising the targets, making them more evidence-based, to tracking progress either historically or into the future towards a long-term target. Next one, please. You can go to the reporting communication component, please, keeping eye on the time here. So next one, skip a few slides. This is all about different kinds of analysis that one can do, and you can see more in the guide. In terms of communication, there are no reporting requirements, as we all know, around just transition. And the emphasis in this chapter is really on thinking through the utility of this information that has been gathered. Next one, please. Who to share it with, what to share and communicate, and how really to use it to communicate with the stakeholders so that it serves the objectives, the benefits of just transition that Chelsea mentioned right in the beginning. So sort of come full circle, think about what objectives you had in mind as you set out to do this exercise, and how the information that's being gathered now could support and could support fulfillment of those objectives. Next one, please. So the guide includes a template to communicate information. This is just meant as a template, a guidance, which has some recommendations regarding two categories to use, to think about as you think of communicating this information to different kinds of possible audience. One is to convey process-related information for transparency purposes. So how things were done, who was involved, how inclusive the process was. The other one is about the more technical information in terms of what you found, the analysis that was done, what are the emerging trends. So tailoring it for various audience groups, which could be domestic audience, but in some cases, perhaps international audience, but there is flexibility in what you pick and choose in terms of what you want to share with the domestic audience versus what you want to share with the international audience here. So next one, please. This, I think, brings us to the end of a quick presentation, just introducing the guide itself. And here is our contact information, and look forward to the discussion session and also hearing reflections from all the country speakers.